New York City's decision to allow a mosque to be built near Ground Zero has not gone unnoticed in other parts of the country where similar plans have been met with fierce resistance. In smaller communities like Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and Sheboygan, Wisconsin, critics of local mosque projects have lashed out, accusing Muslims of trying to undermine America. Well, back in New York, Mayor Mike Bloomberg said resisting such projects would do the most damage.
Lost in the heat of the debate has been a basic question. Should government attempt to deny private citizens the right to build a house of worship on private property based on their particular religion? That may happen in other countries, but we should never allow it to happen here.
Ziad Ramadan is president of the board of the New York chapter of CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations. And a good morning to you, Ziad. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What is it, do you think, people oppose about the prospect of having a mosque near Ground Zero? And can we make a point that a mosque already exists just a couple of blocks away at this point?
Right. I think the issue is that in their minds, American Muslims and Islam as a whole has something to do with 9/11, and they don't. The perpetrators of that act that they attack on our nation do not represent American Muslims. They do certainly not represent Islam. It was a violation of everything Islam stands for. They really need to separate those two things. It's like saying Timothy McVeigh represents all Christianity when he attacked the federal building in Oklahoma City, and that's just not acceptable to anyone.
Let's talk about some of the parallels that I mentioned leading up to this. Mosque projects proposed in other towns have been met with resistance. The New York Times, in fact, quotes a woman leading rallies against a San Diego suburb. Here's what is said. I learned that in 20 years, with the rate of the birth population will be overtaken by Islam, and their goal is to get people in Congress and the Supreme Court to see that Sharia is implemented. My children and grandchildren will have to live under that. I do believe everybody has a right to freedom of religion, but Islam is not about religion. It's about political government. It's 100% against our Constitution. You know, I heard you listening to that and you know, with almost a chuckle there. Why is that thought espoused by some people? What is it about a woman who's able to make that claim? You
know, it's really funny. They're looking at websites like Stop the Islamization of America, where they actually write manifestos on how to protect against mosques who are going to be built in your community. Now, all of this is propaganda and fear and hate mongering. Now, I'm not calling them. The federal government has called these organizations hate groups. And these people are propagandizing and poisoning people's minds with misinformation about what Islam is. Muslims account for about 1% of our entire nation. Just like every other group before us, whether it's the Italians or the Irish, you teach your children to do better in life. They go to law school, they become civically and socially involved, and they might want to run for office. What's wrong with that? It's part of the American fiber. All the different immigrant groups before us have done this. This is the right thing to do. This is part of being American. We are proud Americans, and the fact that anybody tries to strip us of our constitutional rights is outright offensive. And they're setting a precedent against themselves, because other groups will say, hey, we want to treat this group just the same way we ill-treated the Muslims, and that's not right.
You know, Ziad, there's a fairly good chance that if this mosque goes through and is built, again, just a couple blocks closer than one that already exists there to Ground Zero, it will become a lightning rod for folks. Is there any thought given to saying, you know what, maybe this is not going to be able to spread the message that we would like for it to spread, so we may need to put it elsewhere to be more effective in the big picture? What do you think?
I'll tell you, back to the same thing again. This insinuates that Muslims and Muslim Americans have anything to do with the attack on our nation, and that's not acceptable. But to answer your question, you know, we have to have this conversation. People have to understand that Americans come back in caskets with American flags on them, and they're Muslim. And flags are given to their parents when their children die on the front line. They're Muslim Americans. That hundreds of people have died in the towers at 9/11, and they're Muslims. And first responders like my wife went down to Ground Zero, and we helped our fellow Americans and fellow New Yorkers. We're all victims. We were all attacked. The strange thing is that Muslims are still being attacked 10 years later. Muslim Americans are still being attacked, and their rights, their constitutional rights, and that's something that we shouldn't. That's what kills me, you know. Our enemies are in caves laughing their heads off, saying we still got Americans turning against Americans 10 years later. Don't let them win these small victories.
All right, Ziad Ramadan, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
The HBO hit Big Love dramatizes life with multiple